What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome to another episode of Brett on Fett. On today's episode, I got an order back from the grader and it did not go well. And so I want to talk about the ups and downs of grading action figures. Plus, the new carded version of the Dark Trooper for the Vintage Collection finally arrived. And I've got a mail call unboxing for you guys. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the channel. This is episode 102 of Brett on Fett. And as I mentioned in the intro, I recently got an order of figures back from the grader from Collector Archive Services, and it did not go well. And so I wanted to talk about the positives and negatives of grading, the different experiences you might encounter if you're going to send off figures for grading. But before we get into all that, I do have some pickups to share, including the new carded version of the Dark Trooper for TVC, and I got a couple of awesome items from my good friend Gary Moore to unbox. So let's take a look at those. All right, so this past week, I got a box in from Big Bad Toy Store, and inside was the brand new Vintage Collection Dark Trooper on a card. So this is the Dark Trooper on a traditional TVC card back, and it looks fantastic. This should have been the original release of the Dark Trooper, not the deluxe version in that closed box. And it is essentially the same figure, but it does not come with the extra hands. He's got his weapon there, but you see they gave him one open hand and one fisted hand instead of two open hands and two fisted hands like the deluxe version comes. Now he does have the little sunroof in the back, if you will, and it works really nicely on the card here because that red kind of reflects off through his eyes, at least when you have a lot of light in the room. So it looks pretty cool. It is VC271, so I guess this one got released a little later than they had planned because VC270 was Admiral Piet, and that was quite a while ago, but at least they made good on the number. So really happy they finally did a traditional release of the Dark Trooper on a TVC card back as it should be. It looks fantastic. It's going to look very good on my shelf. And also this week, I got a package in the mail from my good friend Gary Moore, great guy in the community. Many of you who watch my channel probably know Gary in some form or fashion. And a while ago, Gary and Andy from the Chronicles podcast and YouTube channel teamed up to purchase a huge Star Wars collection. And over this past year, Gary and Andy have been selling most of the items from this collection, and things are starting to wind down. They had a kind of a garage sale on YouTube the other day, sort of an auction / claim sale, just trying to get rid of some of the final items that they still had lingering. And they were selling stuff for great deals. I mean, there were a couple of things where people did kind of an auction format, and so the price went up a little bit, but for the most part, they were really just trying to get rid of the stuff. And so Gary made a great deal for me on a couple of items, and so I just want to show those real quick. So this first item is a Star Wars Classic Collector Series figural mug from Applause. Now they made a Vader, a Stormtrooper, a 3PO, and a Boba Fett. So you guys know I had to get Boba Fett. And if you guys have followed my channel over the past couple of months, you know I love my Star Wars cups. This thing is from 1995, according to the copyright date there on the bottom. Let's see what we have here is a certificate of authenticity. And there is a flyer to join the Star Wars fan club. That's pretty old. And here is the mug, and it is looking sweet. Check that out. It's a freaking bust of Boba Fett, looking really good. Okay, this is instantly my new favorite Star Wars mug. This is excellent. Thank you so much, Gary, for the great deal. This will be cherished. I will be drinking coffee from this mug quite often. You know, sometimes these character style mugs can go really wrong, but this one went really right. This thing is awesome. And then finally, I got the Ronto and Jawa set from Power of the Force from Gary. Here's a look at the box. There's an image of the Ronto from that scene from the special edition. There's a look at some other waves. That's a pretty good looking boss for the time. And there's that ridiculous deluxe Boba Fett. I actually have that. And the deluxe probe droid, which I have as well, which is a pretty good probe droid. There's some images on the box of what he can do. And this thing is in pristine condition, pretty much. but unfortunately I am going to open this. Apologize to anyone who is an inbox collector who this might hurt, but I gotta get this thing open. The whole point of me getting this was to have the ronto to go outside of the HasLab Cantina. There's a little Jawa mounted there on the inside, but let's get the rest of this open. And there's actually some instructions here. It says step 1, position ronto with head straight up, legs as shown, put Jawa figure on peg, on saddle holding reins. And then step 2, move left rear leg back and forth to make ronto throw Jawa figure from saddle. Okay, that's gonna be interesting. Let's get these twisty ties off. Man, I hate these things. All right, so here is the ronto, and he's looking pretty good. I kind of like the look of this thing. Definitely a lot better than I was expecting. Let's test out the leg movement. See this back leg, you move it and it makes his head go forward and backwards. So that's pretty cool. And then the other legs are articulated as well. But taking a closer look at this thing, you see he's got his harness there. And yeah, this is a well put together little toy. I like the saddle. You know, it could use maybe a little bit of weathering, but it's not a bad looking saddle. The face sculpt on this beast looks really good. Yeah, I'm liking this. A lot of articulation. His little ears articulate. Even his horns kind of move around. You can change the angle of his horns, so that's pretty fantastic. You don't see that all the time. And then here's the Jawa. It's kind of a weird Jawa. He doesn't have articulated legs. And he's just got this single peg hole, so that's a bit weird. So not a great Jawa, but you peg him on the saddle standing up like that, then I guess you got to put his harness in his hand. And this might prove to be a bit tricky. It's not long enough to extend to both of his hands. I think you just got to put it in one Jawa hand. And as you can see, I am struggling to make that happen. Got to lift his head up quite a bit to shorten that distance between the harness and the Jawa hand. I might have to do this off camera. Okay, so I got it off camera, and here he is. He's looking pretty good. Now let's test that bucking maneuver. Again, you just rotate the back leg, and there it kicked him off. But where'd you go? Oh, wait. He's hanging on still. I did such a good job of getting that harness on. I can't get him off. I gotta shake this thing. Let's get this guy off of here. Come on. There he goes. All right. Yeah, he had a kung fu grip on that harness. But that's pretty cool. You know, great little play feature for kids. Of course, I won't be using the play feature too much. I will be posing this guy outside of the HasLab Cantina, and I think this thing is worthy. Might change the Jawa, though. Thanks again, Gary, for the great deal on a great item. That's good boba. Oh, sorry. So, from time to time, I do get questions from some of my followers about grading and whether or not it is worth it. And the short answer to that question is maybe. It's definitely not for everyone, and like most things, there are pros and cons. Now, full disclosure, I do not consider myself an expert on grading. I've only been grading figures for about 3 years now, and I really only get a very small percentage of my collectibles graded. Now, if you want more information from someone who I would consider more of an expert, check out the YouTube channel actionfiguregrading. John the actionfiguregrader has an awesome channel. It's probably the best channel on YouTube when it comes to grading Star Wars figures. He also does comics as well. And on his channel, he's going to give you a good idea of the value of figures that are graded versus ungraded. And he's probably one of the main reasons I actually got into grading. So go check him out. Now, the reasons for getting items graded probably vary depending on who you ask. Now, for me personally, one of the main reasons to get items graded is to provide some sort of standardization of condition. And, you know, condition is extremely subjective depending on the person. What might seem like a completely mint figure to one collector may be utter trash to another. And for buying and selling items online, it can be very difficult sometimes to really see the true condition of a figure depending on the lighting that's used of the photo or how forthcoming the seller is at disclosing issues with a figure. By having a figure graded, you have a much better idea of what it is you got and what it's worth. Because in this hobby, at least in most cases, condition is everything when it comes to value. Some other benefits of getting items graded is to have some sort of certification of authenticity and to protect your items. If your item is sealed in that acrylic case, as long as that case has not been compromised, you know your item has not been tampered with. And also a fun little bonus is the anticipation of what grade you're going to get on an item. This can be particularly exciting when you know you've got something special that you've sent in. Now, as far as cons go, first and foremost, it is not cheap to get items graded. Personally, I'm using Collector Archive Services, or CAS, to get my items graded, and they charge $70 to grade a mint on card modern figure, such as a TVC figure, and $80 to grade a vintage Kenner mint on card figure. And that's not even including shipping. Now, if you happen to live near a grading company, typically they offer options where you can drop off your items and pick them up, and so you can avoid shipping in those cases. But let's face it, that's only a very small percentage of us that would happen to live near them. And the other major con is the wait times typically involved. It can range anywhere from 4 months to up to a year in some cases if you've got some special custom item you want graded and mounted. And so it takes a lot of patience. Now, these companies do offer expedited grading in most cases, but that comes at a premium cost, and to me, it's just not worth it. However, Collector Archive Services, they do offer maybe 3 or 4 times a year free expedited grading on standard carded items. So the standard 6x9 figures, they'll do that. And I personally take advantage of those every time they come out. In fact, I would say the majority of figures I get graded are utilizing those free expedited shipping sales. But aside from those two obvious cons, you can also encounter some other really negative experiences with grading, mainly because you're dealing with a process that involves humans and shipping delicate items across country. And so you're bound to encounter some mistakes and some mishaps from time to time. And so I've got some examples of that with an order that just came this past week. So I want to go over some of those examples, and I'm also going to give you some positive experiences I've had as well. All right, so like I said, I want to give you guys a couple of very negative examples from grading, and these happened to come to me about a week ago, and it's just really disappointing. And in this one order, I got 2 different examples of things that can go wrong with grading. And this first item is an example of inconsistent grading or the occasional completely unfair grade. This does happen every now and then, although I think CAS does a pretty good job with consistency on their grading. But that was not the case here with this bibfortuna Tatooine from the Book of Bobafett. This is the exclusive figure that came with the Boba Fett throne room. I sent this off to CAS. It came back an 80 plus with a sub score of 80 for the card back. Blister and figure were 90, which is great, that's fine. But an 80 on this card back when this thing is basically mint. There are no issues with this card back. It's completely flat, it's clean, it has no creases. It really doesn't even have any edge wear. I was really thinking I was gonna get a 90 on this one, and I just can't believe it came back an 80 plus. To me, anything below 85 with a modern TVC figure is pretty much a fail in my opinion. I don't send stuff in that I think is going to get less than 85 because personally, unless it's a highly rare figure, extremely valuable figure on its own, I don't think it's worth paying the money it costs to get a modern figure graded if you think the condition is going to be average to bad. And in my opinion, any grade below 85 for a modern TVC figure is just average condition. So I was just completely shocked to get this grade from CAS based on how good the cardback condition is. This is by far the most inaccurate grade CAS has ever given me. And I really feel like CAS does a good job at being consistent with their grades. I think the majority of grades they have given my figures have been very fair. So this was really disappointing. I don't know if the grader was just having an extremely bad day or got distracted or what. And unfortunately, when it comes to grading, they do not produce a report that explains exactly what they were seeing. You know, it'd be nice to have like maybe a photo zoomed in on some blemish they saw that marked off points. But, you know, for one, that would probably just take up way too much time and the grading process would be even longer. And two, they probably don't want to give away their secrets of the trade and, you know, their exact strategies on how they do these grades because then their competition could steal it, or it just opens themselves up to, I guess, more ridicule. And although I feel like this is the most unfair grade I've been given by CAS, I have had a very similar situation happen to me in the past from AFA, which actually led to me just giving up on AFA completely. I was so upset with that instance. And that had to do with a miscard figure I found in the wild right after the stalker had put it on the pegs. It was early in the morning on a weekday at a Target, and it was a retro collection figure. It was actually an armorer card back with a Mando figure in the blister, and I was so excited. And the thing was in perfect condition, and I bragged about it on my channel. I was so excited. This was the first time I have ever seen a miscarded figure in the wild, in person. I never thought I would see this sort of thing. It's very rare to come across a miscard, and it's in great shape. I know you can't tell because of all the stupid fake weathering around the edges and everything, but there is no blemishes. There's no creases, scratches, edge wear. It's in really good shape. So I intend to send this thing off to get graded, and I'm really hoping I can get a good score. I think I might be able to get a 90 with this one.
You're going to get it graded, aren't you, Brett? You said you're going to get it graded? Yeah.
I'm gonna send it into AFA.
Oh,
It's in really good shape too. Like there's no blemishes on the card. Yeah, so that was my worst grading experience because of how valuable that miscard figure was and how much the value was affected by that unfair grade. And to give you an example of what I mean, I was so upset about that, I decided to sell that figure. I put it up on eBay, and I actually had someone reach out and tell me that they would have paid my asking price had I not gotten it graded because it had that 80 plus on there. And because of how good the condition looked, they would have paid what I asked for, assuming it would have graded at least a 90. And so because it had 80 plus confirmed, that turned them off from paying my asking price. So that just even irritated me even more. Now, in the end, things worked out because of my great friend Brad, Rocket City Sith in the community. Didn't care about the 80 plus. He looked past that. He really wanted that miscard, and he bailed me out and bought the figure for me. So now I don't have to look at it all the time and be reminded of how angry I was about that unfair grade. And by the way, that all being said, I do want to make something clear. Given that it was a miscard, which is very rare, I still think it's worth getting graded, even if that condition truly was an 80 plus condition, because the grading also validates that it is a true miscard and it's not somebody trying to fake something. So that is a plus in figure grading, not just for the validation of the condition of the figure, but also a validation that the product is legit. And personally, if I'm about to spend a bunch of money on a rare figure, I want to be extremely comfortable knowing that it is legit and I'm not just taking some stranger's word for it. Alright, so the second example of how things can go bad with grading that came from the same order I got in this past week is the special yakface on the Power of the Force card that came exclusively with the first HasLab, that being the Jawa sail barge, and it came back with an 80 grade with subscores card back 80, blister 80, and figure 85. And I'm not upset with this because of the grade. The grade is actually fair. What went wrong with this, which can happen occasionally, is the blister partially lifted off the card on the left side and then also created a litho tear along the card back. And this all happened after I provided it to CAS. And unfortunately, this does happen. Stuff can get damaged during shipment. What's really irritated in this case, though, is that I actually dropped off this figure in person directly to CAS staff at Rebel ScumCon in Dallas. So I handed it to them, and when I dropped it off with them, that bubble was perfectly sealed on the card. But the grade clearly reflects that blister coming off the card and the litho tear on the card. And so my assumption is at some point between me leaving it with CAS and them driving it back to Florida from Dallas, Texas, and then letting it sitting in the office, at some point that blister popped off and then they graded it as such. Again, the grade is fair based on that damage. That is what I would expect, but it was not damaged when I gave it to them, and unfortunately, there's really nothing I can do about it. You know, maybe had I recorded a video of me handing it to them in person and zooming in on the bubble to show it's all perfect when I hand it over to them, you know, maybe at that point they would feel bad and maybe give me a refund or something. I don't know. But short of that happening, there's no way of really proving it. I'm sure they didn't see it pop off themselves. I'm sure once they got to grading it, it was just like that. So it's just a really unfortunate thing that can also happen. It's a much bigger risk actually with vintage Kenner mocks. If you're sending stuff, you know, across country, maybe it's going to be susceptible to some kind of damage, whether it be weather exposure or just uncareful delivery people. And of course, those vintage mocks can be super delicate. So definitely another negative risk when it comes to figure grading. Now, to add insult to injury, when I flipped around to the back, I noticed there is actually a hair locked inside the acrylic. I thought it was a scratch on the acrylic at first. It's not. I looked closer. It is actually a hair trapped inside between the card back and the inside of the acrylic, forever sealed. And that's just a fail in CAS. They gotta be more careful than that. I mean, maybe the hair was on there when I sent it. I don't know, to be honest with you, but they should have at least wiped it off before sealing it inside the acrylic. That's just a total oversight on their part. And by the way, just to circle back to the grade on this figure, you saw the damage with the blister lifting off the card. So something to keep in mind, they gave that card back a sub-score of 80. You know what else they gave a sub-score of 80 for? That bibfortuna that had no discernible blemishes on it at all. And these two figures were graded on the same day. They have a grading date of August 14th, 2024. So the same day, CAS graded one card back with hardly any blemishes you can see at all, an 80, and then turned around and gave an 80 to a card back that has a blister partially ripped off of it with an entire line of litho tears. So that just further validates that the bibfortuna grade was absolutely ridiculous. All right, so enough ranting on some recent and past negative experiences. Not everything was terrible with this order. The third figure from this order was my Princess Leia slave outfit on a revenge card. A very sought after figure in the hobby. And the grade came back very close to what I expected, a little bit better actually. It came back at an 85 plus. I was actually expecting an 85 because of this litho tear on her thigh right there in the front. The rest of the card is pretty much immaculate, but because that litho tear is so prominent, I really did expect the 85, and I think the 85 plus is very fair. Very happy with that score. And this is more consistent with my typical experience with CAS. It usually is a positive experience. I usually do end up getting a grade from them that is not surprising. And I'd like to wrap up this video by giving more examples of positive experiences with grading. Here's just a few of my items that I just really enjoyed getting graded and was very happy with. This is that Off-World Jawa exclusive from the Razor Crest. It came back a 95, and that's as good as it gets with grading, so I was very ecstatic to get that one back. And then also I got the loose baggied Mando from the Razor Crest graded and custom mounted by CAS, and it also came back a 95. That's a loose grade, of course. And the display of this mount looks fantastic. I love this part of my collection, and the fact that it got a 95. It's just really thrilling. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, I also did get the Razor Crest exclusive Grogu graded, but it came back in 85 plus. It did have a few blemishes here and there, so I was fine with that, but just not as exciting as the 95s I got for the other two figures. And another positive example I have for you is my autographed The Emperor, signed by Ian McDermott. Got to meet him at ICCC last year. And so CAS can offer a signature series where they also authenticate the autograph in addition to grading the figure. It came back at 90, which I was very happy with. That Emperor was very hard to find in good condition. A lot of them came in beat up for some reason. And it's just really nice to have the grade of the figure and the authentication of the autograph on one label. And then finishing things up with a couple of vintage Kenner items. Here is my loose graded Taiwan Bobafett with the correct V5 blaster. It came back a 90 grade, probably in my top 5 happiest moments of collecting when I got that back from the grader. It's just very satisfying to go out and buy a figure yourself, not graded, and then get it sent in and for it to come back so high of a grade for such an old item. When that kind of stuff happens, it is the most rewarding feeling when it comes to grading. Which leads me to probably my favorite moment in grading, and that is when I purchased a 48 back C Bosk mint on card, ungraded, and I sent it in and it came back at 85 with subscores 85 for the card, 85 for the blister, and 80 for the figure. And the only reason the figure got an 80 is it got docked for the gun coming loose off the tape. When that happens, it is the figure that gets dinged for it. So that was fair. And by the way, that gun was still partially attached to the tape when I sent it off, but by the time it got to them, it had completely come off during shipment. Understandable, it was just barely hanging on. And so just another example of how that stuff can happen. So just be aware of that when you're sending these old vintage Kenner figures to grading if you haven't done that before. And definitely if you're going to send a vintage Kenner mint on card figure, make sure you ship it in some kind of case, like a star case or figure shield, or even an acrylic case, but just get it in a case and then protect that as well. Pack it very well to help reduce the risk of anything happening to your figure during shipping. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, not only was this the first Kenner mint on card figure I got graded, this was my first Kenner mint on card figure I ever bought, period. So it was just extra satisfying, just a really positive experience for me to find this figure, sort of a diamond in the rough, if you will, get it sent off to CAS, and then to have just an awesome grade come back. Super satisfying. So despite all the negative experiences I talked about at the beginning of this conversation on grading, for me personally, I still think I've had way more positive experiences overall. Alright, so hopefully some of these experiences I personally had with grading will give you a little insight on what you could expect if you want to get into grading. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier is what companies you can send your items into for grading. And really, you only have 3 reputable choices. You've got the Action Figure Authority, or AFA, you have Collector Archive Services, or CAS, and you have United Kingdom Grading, or UKG. And so if you're in North America, for example, you're probably going to want to use either AFA or CAS. And if you're in the UK or Europe, you're probably going to want to use UKG. And you really can't go wrong with any of those 3 companies. Now, between AFA and CAS, there are quite a few differences that I'm not going to get into on this video. And it really comes down to personal preference. Now, AFA does carry with it a little more prestige than CAS because they've been around longer and they have a reputation of being tougher on the grading. And so if you have a high grade AFA, it may have a little bit more value than a high grade for CAS. But I'm here to tell you that CAS has, over the past few years, gotten tougher and tougher on their grading, to the point where, to me, the grading is basically the same between those 2 companies. That's just my personal opinion based on my experience. Plus, for me personally, I like CAS's ordering system way better than AFA's. To me, it's a lot more streamlined, it makes a lot more sense. And for me personally, I stopped using AFA a while ago because I got irritated with their ordering system, and then I just got fed up with them after that miscarded figure issue with that grade that just seemed way too unfair. I just couldn't let that go. So I just go with CAS now personally. But that doesn't mean you're going to have the same negative experiences with AFA. So I would recommend maybe trying both out, sending one thing into AFA, sending another to CAS, and see how you like the process with both companies before you decide to go with one or the other. Alright, that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me and checking out this video. Thank you so much to my subscribers. Don't forget, you can also follow me on Instagram. Take care, and we'll see you next time.